Wunderbar. Einfach nur noch mit dem Laptop und die Sache läuft. Sehr schön. Ja, wunderschönen guten Tag. Mein Name ist 𝗕𝗂𝗄𝗵𝗏. Gemeinsam mit Johanna Süß leiten wir das Lichter Filmfest dieses Jahr zum 15. Mal, 15 Jahre Lichter Filmfest. Und wer uns kennt, weiß, dass wir immer jährlich wechselnde Schwerpunktthemen haben. Das ist dieses Jahr das Thema Freiheit, das eine ganz besondere Bedeutung bekommen hat. Und umso mehr freut es uns, dass wir über diesen Begriff hier in der ehrwürdigen Paulskirche reden können und dürfen. Wir werden uns jetzt gleich auch noch mal zu Wort melden, Frau Süß und ich. Bevor das aber passiert, möchte ich jetzt ganz herzlich die Kulturdozentin der Stadt Frankfurt, Frau Dr. 𝗕𝗲𝗿𝗶𝗍𝗂 auf der Bühne begrüßen, die Sie ganz herzlich willkommen heißen wird.
Ich glaube, das Mikro muss ein bisschen weiter runter. Dankeschön. Liebe Johanna Süß und lieber 𝗕𝗂𝗄𝗵𝗏, dear Lichter team, je salue Monsieur 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗿𝗏𝗏 et sa femme Michelle, dear Susan Newman-Baudet and Mathieu Fournet, dear 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗏𝗏 and Pauline Durand-Vial, liebe Karin Wolf, hochverehrte Vertreterinnen und Vertreter der Filmverbände, liebe Filmschaffende, liebes Publikum, dear all. The microphone is getting down and down and down. Vielleicht noch mal ein bisschen feststellen. Ja, so. Gut, Dankeschön. It is my honor to open today's event, and I am very pleased to welcome you to the final debate of the Lichter Congress on the future of film, Forum Europe, in this unique historic location. For those of you who might be visiting Frankfurt for the first time, the Paulskirche here in Frankfurt represents the beginnings of German democracy. The legal establishment of the most important universal and human and civil rights took place here for the first time in December 1848. It included the equality of all before the law and the guarantee of the personal and political freedom. The decision to hold the closing of the conference in the Paulskirche is, of course, no coincidence. After all, the program of the 15th anniversary edition of the Lichter Filmfest Frankfurt deals with the topic of freedom, Freiheit. All the organizers set the ambitious topic. No one could have foreseen that Europe would be at war by the time it takes place. This war most painfully reminds us all of the deep value of our democratic constitution, our freedom, our way of life, and the opportunity of having a political voice. The importance of culture as a crucial part within a democratic society, with its meaning-giving, personality-building, and integrative power, can't be emphasized often enough. Since 2018, Lichter Filmfest Frankfurt Internationale provides with its Future of German Film initiative important impulses for the Germany-wide film political debate. This year's Congress takes into account that similar issues of film funding, the future of film and cinema, film education are also being discussed with increasing urgency in other European countries. The war in the Ukraine and its consequences are pushing the idea of a cooperative world order based on peace, prosperity, and the pursuit of common goals into the distance. It makes it all the more important to exchange views across national borders. In recent days, Lichter Filmfest succeeded in turning Frankfurt into a future laboratory for German and European film and cinema. It examines all sorts of constraints hidden in the entire chain of the film creation and distribution practices. The city of Frankfurt is very fortunate to host the debate here, as it is part of our city's tradition to influence film political debates and to shape the film cultural landscape. Last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary since the founding of the former 𝗕𝗂𝘃𝗵𝗂𝗃 Kino. The idea of the legendary former head of the Department of Culture, 𝗕𝗂𝗄𝗵𝗶𝗀, was to free film from its economic constraints and to create an affordable place for debates and films for all citizens. At the time, it was not only a pioneering cultural political act, it was also an initial spark for the promotion and cultivation of the film art throughout Germany. A considerable amount of time has passed since the 1970s. The German, as well as Frankfurt's film and cinema landscapes have dramatically changed, especially since the mid-90s. The large number of films produced today can't be shown in cinemas anymore and can only be seen at film festivals. Many of Frankfurt's film festivals originated from initiatives of committed citizens who are enthusiastic about cinema, international film, and the conversation surrounding it. 𝗕chter Film Festival began without public mandate, but through a lot of commitment from a small group of film enthusiasts. In our challenging times, 𝗕chter Film Fest will continue the conversation and make an effort to welcome film creatives from all over Europe. Dear 𝗕chter Film Fest, I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate you once again on your 15th anniversary. And now I wish everybody an inspiring discussion and a wonderful day in Frankfurt.
Vielen Dank an der Stelle nochmal an Sie, Frau Dr. 𝗕𝗂𝗏𝗏, und an das ganze Kulturamt und an die Stadt Frankfurt, die uns jetzt seit 15 Jahren begleitet und uns immer unterstützt und das auch dieses Jahr gemacht hat. Ohne die Stadt würde es dieses Festival nicht geben und deshalb ganz vielen Dank. Und Frau 𝗕𝗂𝗏 möchte ich als nächstes auf die Bühne bitten. Sie ist die Geschäftsführerin des Kulturfonds Frankfurt Rhein-Main, die sie jetzt ebenfalls noch ganz kurz begrüßen möchte. Und auch ohne ihr Geld wäre dieser Kongress nicht möglich gewesen.
Lieber Herr Schubert, liebe Frau 𝗚ße, Frau Hartwig, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, ich möchte das 𝗕chter-Team beglückwünschen für 15 Jahre einerseits, aber auch dafür, dass Sie die Rundfunkanstalten gekidnappt haben, offensichtlich. Ich konnte in dieser Woche kein einziges Mal Auto fahren, ohne unterwegs in HR oder Deutschlandradio Interviews mit Ihnen beiden zu hören. Und das war eine Reichweite, die Sie doch dadurch bekommen haben, die für dieses Festival hoch erfreulich ist. Ich möchte Sie auch beglückwünschen, natürlich zu dem Begriff Freiheit. Ich habe schon bei der Pressekonferenz gesagt, das ist ein Thema, bei dem Sie vor einem Jahr, als Sie das Thema herausarbeiteten, wahrscheinlich an andere Konnotationen gedacht haben. Aber es ist ein Thema, was von brennender Aktualität ist. Es ist nicht mehr die Pandemie oder vielleicht doch. Es ist auf jeden Fall Krieg, Unrecht, autoritäres System, mit dem wir zu kämpfen haben in der ganzen Welt. Und das in Bezug zum Film und zur Zukunft des Filmes zu betrachten, scheint mir von außerordentlicher Bedeutung. Und es wird nach der Pandemie mit Sicherheit noch einmal sich die Frage deutlicher stellen, bekommt der Film, bekommen die Kinos, die Menschen wieder, die Filme sehen wollen, die Filme gemeinsam sehen wollen und nicht nur auf dem Sofa, die thematische Filme sehen wollen, die Filme in einer besonderen Umgebung sehen wollen. Und ich hoffe das sehr. Und deswegen sind wir auch dabei als Kulturfonds. Wir können keine Filmproduktion fördern, aber wir fördern viele kleine und feine Filmfestivals in unserer Region. Das machen wir sehr bewusst, das machen wir gerne und wir kommen auch gerne in Zukunft wieder in den Diskurs mit denen, die solche Filmfestivals in unserer Region organisieren. In diesem Sinne noch einmal herzlichen Dank, herzlichen Glückwunsch und alles Gute jetzt für diesen Kongress. Vielen Dank.
So, jetzt wird es kompliziert, weil Johanna Süß ein bisschen kleiner ist als ich. Entweder gehe ich in die Knie, würde ich sagen. Oder ich mache es ein bisschen hoch. So, jetzt möchte ich erst nochmal ganz herzlich 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗶𝗀𝗂 begrüßen. Hier zu meiner Seite links. Welcome 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗶𝗀𝗂. Welcome 𝗕𝗂𝗵𝗶𝗄𝗂. We have one thing in common. We have the same socks. I realized it a few minutes ago. Dann nochmal ganz herzlich willkommen die Kulturdezernentin der Stadt Frankfurt, Frau Dr. 𝗕𝗂𝗿𝗄𝗆, haben wir schon gehört. Dann Miriam Schnitt, die Landtagsabgeordnete von Bündnis 90 Die Grünen. Wo sitzt sie? Hallo, schön, dass du hier bist. Frau Karin-Wolf, auch schon gehört, vielen Dank, dass Sie hier sind. Vielen Dank für die warmen Worte. Wir fühlen uns geehrt und sind beeindruckt über Ihr Radiohörverhalten. Das ist schön. Und sehr verehrte Stadtgeordnete, sehr verehrte Stadträte, Klaus Möbius sitzt hier zur Rechten, verehrte Mitglieder des Magistrats, schön, dass Sie hier sind, liebe Festivalgäste, liebe 𝗓𝗄. Wir freuen uns sehr, an diesem denkwürdigen Ort zu sein und hier das Jubiläum zu feiern. Sie haben es schon gesagt, Frau Wolf, die Pandemie selbst war wahrscheinlich nicht so anstrengend wie die Zeit danach, in der wir uns jetzt befinden. Wir sind verletzt und müssen langsam wieder laufen lernen. Das haben wir die letzten Tage gemerkt. Wir sind wieder in die Freiheit entlassen worden, um es mal so zu formulieren. Wir können uns wieder frei bewegen. Aber die Wunden, glaube ich, die verheilen langsamer, als uns das lieb ist. Und daran müssen wir arbeiten und müssen auf jeden Fall auch kämpfen dafür, weil von alleine wird das vielleicht nicht passieren. Und wir müssen alles dafür tun, dass es uns wieder gut geht als Gesellschaft und auch als Kinoliebhaberinnen und Kinoliebhaber, die das Kino schmerzlich vermisst haben, die aber natürlich den Weg zurückfinden müssen. Und das sehen wir auch an den Publikumszahlen. Da ist Luft nach oben und wir müssen ganz schnell Sorge dafür tragen, dass die vielen wunderbaren Filme, die derzeit zu beobachten sind, also man könnte quasi 3-mal die Woche ins Kino gehen und ich hätte immer noch nicht genug, dass die gesehen werden, dass sie ihr Publikum finden und dass die dieses Publikum vor allem im Kino finden, weil da gehören die Filme hin. Und dafür kämpfen wir und dafür haben wir diesen Kongress organisiert und haben das vor 3 Jahren gemacht und haben das jetzt wieder gemacht, dank Ihrer großzügigen Unterstützung. Und ich glaube, der Kampf lohnt sich. Wir glauben an das Kino, an die Verführung des Kinos und für uns ist es der schönste Ort der Welt.
Dear FERA member, I skip the English translation because this will be exactly the same you're going to talk about. I would love to welcome you to this panel and give over to 𝗂𝘃𝗄𝗏. She will introduce all our wonderful guests and we will also have guests online.
Invite our panelists to come to the stage. Au milieu. Parfait. David, here you go. And there is a chair missing. Okay, take my chair. That's fine. In Interesting. Well, take mine and I'll stay up. That's fine.
Please sit.
All right.
Yeah, I think
Please sit. Mathieu, go ahead. Take your seat. And then we will stay up for a moment. That's fine. All right, so the task to introduce our panelists on stage and online comes to me now. I'm 𝗕𝗲𝗂𝗶𝗹𝗶𝗀, the CEO of the Federation of European Screen Directors. We have been fortunate enough to have 3 days of meetings and discussions about a lot of topics that are absolutely critical to European filmmakers, both in their own national contexts and together as a European community. And I'm a little bit worried about this sort of thing with sound, but that's fine. And we are really absolutely delighted to be today in this very solemn location to have a conversation with very distinguished guest speakers on filmmaking and politics, which is granted a very wide potential discussion, but that we will steer through with my co-moderator Martin Winkler from the Dutch filmmaking community, filmmaker himself and part of the FAIR board.
And it's called Filmmakers and Politics, a mismatch question. So that's, already a bit of a provocative start, I hope.
So, as you can see, filmmakers within FAIR have a provocative mind. Well, my job is to make it slightly less provocative so that we can talk to people who do not like that so much. But we try to keep an even balance. So, to our panelists. First, of course, 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗂𝗂𝗃, who needs little introduction, I think. David Bernet, who is a Swiss-German filmmaker. Is that correct? Yes. We also have with us Mathieu Fournet, who is Director for International and European Affairs at the CNC in France. Suzanne Newman-Baudet, who is the Executive Director of 𝗗𝘃𝗍𝗄𝗏. And we also have online, a little bit behind, Maria Silvia Gatta from the European Commission. I'm sorry, I've just got a bit of a mix-up there. And Thomas Eskilsson from Cinémathèque and also from 𝗕𝗲𝗿𝗶 Analysis, if I remember correctly. And with that introduction, I will now shut up, sit down, and give it to Martin to start us off.
Thank you, Pauline. Well, welcome. What I wanted to start off with our distinguished filmmakers who are here. If we talk about filmmaking and politics, I want to start off talking about what's the relationship between filmmaking and politics. What do filmmakers have to do with politics, and what do politics have to do with filmmaking? And two directors who are here are very active in this space. The work they make is very much politically motivated. It's very much about politics even. David Bernet made a documentary called Democracy, which, well, says it all, you could say. And 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗂𝗃 with a distinguished oeuvre which goes into politics. So my question to you to start this off maybe, if you look at journalism, for instance, there's a very clear-cut role that journalists play when it comes to politics, right? They say it's about checking the power. So what do filmmakers, do filmmakers have an obligation? What is the role of filmmakers when they look at politics? Yeah, David?
Well, maybe I start with a story that I remembered when I heard that you are present today. When I was a philosophy student in Vienna as a young man, I met a political activist in Vienna who pretty much has been activated by seeing your film set in '69, maybe the premiere, I don't know. And he told me very colorfully how this premiere enrolled, and that in the end of the film, the audience was standing on their chairs, shouting political slogans, totally activated, enraged. And I think that's an idea of political film that doesn't appear very much nowadays. It's rather unthinkable that we would have films that have the political impact of such a that happened in your time in the 60s, the things that you had to fight for. For myself, as a documentary filmmaker, the whole political intention is to just widen the horizons, to use my privilege as a filmmaker to enter in milieus which are not accessible for normal people and which prevents them of understanding, let's say, the complexity of society and the colors of society.
Yes?
So, sorry, I would be better in French, but I will try with my poor English to explain my position. We are filmmakers, which means we are spectacle makers. We're telling stories. We don't make politics. We are not militants politically. We can be in life, but on the cinema, myself. But the fact, what happens in our movies with the audience, it's another thing, and sometimes escapes completely to us. And especially, depends on the public, depends on whom. So when I listen people saying you make political movies, I don't know what they mean. All movies are political. Why are political? Because we address ourselves, we tell our stories, we tell them to the big audience. Thousands of people, sometimes millions of people. And the actions, it's up to you. It's your problem. It's not our problem at the beginning. We cannot say, I will try to do something to convince people to think this or to think that. No, it's our conviction, which is in the movie, and we do what you want with it. We reject it, we will accept it, we discuss about it. That's, I think, the cinema and the role I see, unless for myself, my role in the cinema, the way I'm doing it in movies. And particularly, we cannot say, who are the public? We speak about the public. Who are the public? So many people here are all different. Different positions, different culture, different language sometimes. And you're thinking differently, I hope, all of you. So the perception of the image, I repeat, it's a problem, it's your problem. So I insist to the fact that all the movies are political, and you cannot expect that. The other reason we cannot have as a proof that all the political powers try to control the movies. For that, we have censorship everywhere. So political censorship, religious censorship, all kinds of censorships, which means we do something they would like to control. This is also a sign of the movies have to be considered as political actions.
Yes, because you touch upon what will be my next question. If you make films about politics, in this space, as filmmakers, we are dependent on politics in terms of funding, for instance, right? Or rules. How does it affect the kind of stories that you play? What is needed for a thriving film community to be critical about politics and yet be dependent on politics? We'll get to them. We'll get to them next. This is the bridge towards their story. Do you have any? Is that possible? Is that maybe what's to create critical or any stories within the political space? Is that a necessity for a democracy to function? You think? What's your opinion?
I think also the movie, it's a passion. It can be a kind of commercial thing you make, but I believe the real authors have passions to tell this story and not another story. So this passion comes from inside and from inside, both sides. And which means we talk about our society, what's going on in our societies. And what's going on in our societies can affect us deeply, do a tragedy or a comedy or whatever. Charlie Chaplin did extraordinary political movies. The modern times, if you watch it today, it's amazing. They speak about our society today. It's a little sad to say so, but it's the truth. So it's a passion. We tell a story with our passions, and I come back to you, audience. I'm also an audience, and you think you accept it or not. Now, the important thing, it's important because you come to the real theme of that meeting, I believe. It's how the power affects what we're trying to do with freedom or not. That's the most important finally. You have some countries, I can speak about France without hesitation, probably for Germany also, other countries, that have the freedom to do the movies we like to do. There is no any more censorship. There were free censorship several years in France. It was a big fight, and we succeed to not have censorship, no any censorship. Of course, there are people who try to stop the movies, but I think the power itself, the laws, permit us to make movies freely, which is absolutely necessary in a society. The freedom is essential. We speak about democracies. There is no any reason for a minister or for a priest to say, no, you cannot do that, we can't do that. This is definitely. We have succeeded that, which is not the same thing for everywhere. Now, the other problem is the movies, we need money to make them. That's a big problem. If you're a painter, playing some painting, it's a writer, it's a pencil, some paper, you do what you want. A movie needs money because a big team and so forth, you know that. So the money, where is coming from? The money is coming from people who have money. They invest to make more money, probably. So they push in a certain direction, the directors. But the important thing is to have the state helping that art to be free and to be different, make different movies, not to repeat all the time the same movies. And sometimes do it, some states do it, some power do it, and some other countries don't do it, or they are different. We can say in France we have enough complete system since now 70, 80 years to be able to make movies thanks to help of the power, the money, the help of the power, but not also with money, with our different small helps, we really permit, and probably you're going to tell about that, with the big details, that permit us to be free, to make movies. We make a lot of movies in France, probably too many, but they are here. Young people can make it. A lot of women, let's say the French movies are 30% women's movie, which I think unique in the world. And the first movies are very numbers. I don't have exactly the numbers, but we can tell them, Mathieu. Which is, in my feeling, necessity for an art to exist. And it's an important art because more and more we see the society through the cinema, through the audiovisual, let's say, but particularly through the cinema. If we know something about Germans, for example, it's done because we have seen German movies. No other way. Reading, it's not the same thing. Having articles in the newspapers, all different thing. You spoke about journalists. We are not journalists. We are far away from the journalism, unfortunately. So this is the role of that audiovisual. We have images everywhere. And we believe also that the cinema or the audiovisual has to be taught in the schools for the young people to understand what's behind the images, what they try to sell us. This is important thing. So, okay, we try to convince the French government to do it, but it's not well done for the moment. Has to progress a lot. So, I don't know if I'll answer to your question.
No, definitely, yes, yes. David, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
Yes, yes. As you say, there is no censorship, let's say, in the European Union in that sense of somebody is really censoring politically what you're doing or not doing. But there are a lot of cultural or economical obstacles, for sure. The cultural obstacles are the control of images or the market of awareness that allows to tell stories or not to tell stories, or to, let's say, to have an audience for a story or not have an audience. We all know that whatever we listen now about Ukraine is opening up our eyes on a crisis, on a war, on a horrible situation, but at the same time, we forgot about the rest of the world. So that's the economy of awareness that we have to deal with, and which is rather complicated for a documentary filmmaker like us, for instance. But the point for us, especially maybe in a different way than for fiction film, is that are the risks that we take if we do certain stories. And it's also about money. The point is not that the government says this is allowed or not allowed. The point is that we seldom have access to important economic institutions or companies, or we have to fear that the companies are suing us, or the parties or whoever is involved in a documentary, and we can take the risk to finance that. That's why certain stories are never told. A friend of mine has made a beautiful film about an isle that has tried to defend itself against the interest of the Barclay family, the bank, the Barclay twins, who wanted to create a safe space for their friends and other billionaires like them on this isle, and they lost. And that film can't be shown because they sued the company who did the film. The film is telling us a lot about how corrupt, even in Europe, justice is. But it's impossible to see that film now because they're just suing them. It's easy. The easiest way to silence filmmakers is to sue them. And we never have the economical power to stand a trial like that against billionaires. And I think that's a very hidden story of what the problem of real political active documentary is in our time, even in Europe.
It reminds me a bit of yesterday at a panel with 𝗕𝗂𝗄𝗿𝗀𝗄𝗃, and let me call it like bureaucratic censorship. It's not meant to be censorship, but she talked about 𝗗𝗂𝗿𝗶𝗶𝗀, the beautiful film which wins many awards. Why was it necessary that we have more than 10 funding bodies, co-production, to even get that film made? The process to get that funded, was so hard. Why are these so important stories for our current culture so difficult to make, right? And in this process, is the chance that things get lost or not made at all are very big, and there's maybe no big censorship dark clouds hanging over it by chance, but things happen or don't happen because of this process. So maybe that's a little jump to
a segue into.
Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely. I think a lot of discussions we've had also with our members over the last couple of days show that all these fundamentals that you are talking about in terms of allowing for a truly independent and free creation in our sector depend enormously on public intervention, but that it does not prevent at all from massive pressure to exist on the ability for filmmakers to tell stories that they really feel like are necessary to tell. And that can come both from an ideological standpoint, and unfortunately I have to report that censorship within the European Union still exists. Unfortunately, we've had to look into pretty shocking situations sometimes at national level, which we just have to also try and face collectively as a community of European filmmakers, but also from the commercial side, of course. And this sort of also leads to this notion that the evolution of public intervention in a very changing audiovisual landscape, where the natural instinct of a filmmaker to tell a story is more and more driven also by commercial concerns, which are fair to some extent. As you say, audiovisual works are quite costly to produce, and then it is also logical that private investment is looking for a sort of a return on investment in the relationship with an audience that would really provide some cash afterwards. But nonetheless, the recent changes and particularly, as I'm sure we all have in mind, pretty much all the time these days. The arrival of global streaming platforms producing in Europe with a certain editorial intent has definitely shaken a lot of things within the entire value chain, from filmmakers themselves and their creative space, which is something that we are discussing a lot within our community, be it on commercial productions or more art house productions. Where is it that you still have space to really create something and interact with your audience? But also, I think for producers, we know that's a massive question, and also for our public funders and for the legislators, both at European level and national level. And this is a bit of a long segue into maybe the first question I'll ask will be to you, Mathieu. Not necessarily in your capacity of representative of the CNC in France, but as a representative for France at large. France has been president of the council in Brussels for roughly 6 months now, and has put forth ambitions for culture and for our sector. And if you can tell us a bit about that, I think it would also enlighten the sort of political mindset of France as a political leader in Europe.
Okay, that's very large.
It's a tall order.
What you've been talking from the beginning. Just, I'm going to start just on freedom of artistic creation, what Costa was talking about. I think it's very important that in France we have a law about this. It's set in stone, la loi sur la liberté de création artistique, and it's something that it's very dear to us and very important, and we are actually launching a new program linked to this law next week in Cannes that will make France once again at the first place to help and welcome filmmakers at risk from other countries. But that's the political side, and you're more leading towards the public policies, maybe not politics, but public policies, and what France has been pushing for in this new presidency. The last time France was leading the EU was 14 years ago, and this is a moment when we manage collectively, because being the president is just to lead a collective effort and not only to push your own agenda. And collectively we managed to make huge steps regarding piracy and the development of legal content online. This time, since January, we've been pushing for sovereignty and independence of works. So we go back to the second part of what you were talking before, which is more like the regulations and how do you provide an environment that allows filmmakers to create their works and producers to produce. So what we've been pushing for is a very ambitious transposition of the 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗻 directive. And so in France, nonetheless, with decrees that were voted in July and then at the end of the year 2021 and the last one in January 2022, so it's very recent, we pushed, there is the quotas for European works, but we also put in place obligations of investment. And I know it's a debate at the moment in the German film community and the German producers and the German authorities as well, and we really hope that this topic will move forward in Germany as well, as always. So we put obligations, so platforms, the streaming platforms you were talking about, in France are now have an obligation of reinvesting 20% of their revenues in European content, and we also organized and forcing them to also go towards independent production. So in the film and cinema, it's 75%, and for audiovisual work, 66% of what they will reinvest, that will have to be dealt with independent producers. So that's very, very important. And we also have another point, which is that 85%, between 75 and 85% of the works will have to be French-speaking language. So you'll see what we are always trying to push, it's obviously freedom of expression, freedom of artistic creativity, but also organizing regulations that protect and preserve independence of filmmakers, independence of producers, independence of companies, cultural diversity. And just one thing, because we've been talking a lot about national level funding, and 𝗏𝘂𝗄 was mentioning it as well, that in France we have a very complex system, and it's public policies, it's not politics. And we are extremely proud as well to have international co-production agreement. We have we have 60, and after Cannes I think we're going to have 62, which is very important, and also funding for international co-production, what you were mentioning earlier. And we have a very important one with 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗄𝗏 with Germany.
I think 2 points that you just mentioned are very, even if indeed public policy is not exactly politics, it still stands that the vision underpinning this public intervention is very strong, and this notion that you can support co-productions bilaterally also is an important part of what makes us European. It's not only what comes from the top, but also how you sort of articulate cooperation between countries that constitutes the group, and that is something that I think probably on a daily basis, filmmakers across Europe experience, because co-production is really the life and soul of how cultural diversity can truly exist in our sector in Europe, because we know that production countries do not necessarily have the same size and means, so these type of cooperations are essential. And maybe that's a very good transition to you, Susan, since Eurimages has been such a critical, I don't even know how to qualify it, such a critical house to go to be able to build co-productions beyond the European Union, but still with this notion that a collaboration as Europeans is really key. And can you tell us about how Eurimages is sort of building that activity, also projecting in the future?
Thank you, Pauline. Well, if I can be modest, let's just say that Eurimages has been useful as a body that is there exclusively to help filmmakers when they want to work in the co-production arena. I think it's also important to maybe link back a little bit to the theme of this debate, because Eurimages is part of the Council of Europe, which is an organization which promotes and protects human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The Council of Europe envisages culture as an absolutely indispensable part of fostering healthy and well-functioning democratic societies and making sure that they're sustainable. And so the fact that Eurimages is situated within the Council of Europe as a cultural fund supporting filmmakers who work in an arena across borders with production companies working together to share risks, share opportunities, and bring together quality films that we hope reach out to audiences. It's really an essential part of our mission. But politics has come to visit Eurimages rather surprisingly in a way that nobody would have wanted or expected over the last months. Because as an intergovernmental body, we embrace all the countries of the Council of Europe, and the Council of Europe has, at the moment, 46 member states across wider Europe, and we have 39. We had 40. And why we only have 39 today is because in mid-March, one of our member states was expelled. And that, of course, is the Russian Federation. We would never have expected it. We would never have wanted it. But this, of course, is politics in action in the cultural domain. It has visited us, and we can no longer now support Russian production companies. However, let's nuance that a little bit, because this debate has been a little bit polarized. And the Council of Europe's policy in general, and that of Eurimages, is that civil society continues to be something that can be engaged with. Russian civil society can be engaged with. It is institutional cooperation that is impossible for us at this point. We all know that there are filmmakers, you had a panel about it yesterday, Filmmakers at War, who may be of Russian origin, but are living and working outside of the Russian Federation, and who are dissident voices, and they are doing exactly what we are discussing today, speaking out, saying things that perhaps politicians do not wish to hear, but which deserve support and which are an important part of the dialogue that we all must engage in today in order to ensure that our societies continue to function in the democratic way that we would like them to do so. If I may just continue on an institutional note also, I think it's important also to recollect that at the level of ministers of culture, who are those who decide what our policy is and in a relatively rapid trickle-down effect impact what public policy can be at the level of film and audiovisual policy. The Council of Europe staged and held at the, under the Italian presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, a conference of ministers of culture. This covered ministers of culture all over Europe, and one of the important points of this conference was to restate the importance of culture as a key part of ensuring healthy democracies with the evolutions that we are now all facing in our industry. Notably and very specifically mentioned was the arrival of artificial intelligence in our industry and what that does to consumer choice, what it does to the simple functioning of our industries now that we have a certain dominance of video on demand and streaming platforms whose business models are informed by predictive algorithms and artificial intelligence. So it's really important that at the political level, the assertion was made that we continue as ministers of culture to support culture as an element which can work with and alongside the technological developments which we all need and which are providing opportunities for our specific industry, but that we reassert the importance of culture there. Now, I've had a very long political dissertation there, so Pauline, if you want to ask me more concrete things, please do.
We will move to maybe more concrete points right after, but I think your what you're talking about here on the interplay between technology and creation and how public intervention adjusts to that new reality is really probably what we need to go into more depth about right after. But before we do that, let's move to Maria Silvia, that I see on the screen here, but who is over here from the camera point, from the European Commission. Maria Silvia, you come from an institution which is obviously quite different from the others that we've mentioned before, which has a pretty specific competence and mission towards the audiovisual sector, which is embodied by one of its most visible features, of course, the media program that I think a lot of filmmakers in the room know quite well from experience. And you've had a new media program set up for the next 7 years with new orientations. And can you tell us how the filmmaker's perspective and the creative perspectives is embodied in this new program?
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you for inviting me, and please accept the greetings of 𝗕𝗂𝗄𝗿, my director, who is not able to be here with you for personal reasons. Yes, the new media program. The new media program is very much an evolution of the previous media program. And what remains of the media program is that it is centered around two aspects. The first one being primarily an industrial program supporting the audiovisual industry, but also supporting, preserving, and promoting cultural diversity as part of the larger Creative Europe program. So these two souls are really a bit the core of the program, as it has been for 30 years. Clearly, in the current context, the industrial dimension is becoming very prominent, but that doesn't take away the cultural dimension and the promotion of cultural diversity. How does this affect the creators? The creators are at the core of the audiovisual industry. Without a strong creative impulse, the industry doesn't exist. I don't need to tell you this. And to further strengthen our support and interest in preserving a strong creative sector. Of course, we don't intervene in anything that has to do with content and politics, because for respect of artistic freedom, we never intervene on what we support. What we do is simply create the conditions for these talents to emerge throughout the industry. How? By securing co-productions, securing cooperation at European level, but by strengthening the harmonization of the European internal market in the audiovisual sector. So by making sure that countries with so-called low capacity are part of the creative ecosystem of the audiovisual industry. And also, of course, by promoting talents throughout the industry and throughout the union, by the usual training schemes that I suppose most of you have been part of or have been familiar with. And a third element that, again, I'm going back to what Mr. 𝗏𝘂𝗿 was rightly pointing at, is ensuring that we create a public and we support a diverse public for the European works, which means supporting the circulation of European works and making audiences acquainted and educate audiences to the European film language. This we do it with supporting the places and the theaters, primarily through our 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗂𝘂 network, that is still a place where indeed European audiovisual works are seen and become a political element, become the sort of embodiment of the political action of making films. So supporting the cinemas, especially after the tragic consequences that they have experienced after the COVID crisis, but also supporting the circulation of non-national European works through the distribution schemes. So whilst, again, authors are not primarily beneficiary of the Creative Europe program because of the many bureaucratic constraints that we have, primarily that we are an industry program supporting companies, we think that we work towards an ecosystem, an audiovisual ecosystem, whereby creativity is at the core of our support and our policy. Finally, we have started this year a pilot project supported, promoted by the European Parliament, that really aims at promoting co-writing experiences with the Writing European pilot action, which again, with all the bureaucratic constraints, indirectly gets to the author, not as directly as we had initially imagined. But I think that through this kind of new way of cooperation and promoting the cooperation among talents, we hope that we can first bring together very diverse talents throughout Europe, and also ensure that innovation is not only technological, but it's really a creative innovation. Voila. So that's in a nutshell what the new program is about.
Thanks, Maria-Silvia. I think this is, I mean, we can always discuss how all of that is actually embodied in practice and how it's actually felt within the sector. But maybe to stick to our general point here, moving to Thomas, you wrote a report on the perspectives of public film funding, and you also touched to how new realities in the markets were going to potentially affect public intervention. And I think, be it at European level or national level, this is a question that we sort of all start to really consider, because in daily let's say, a working practice for filmmakers, you can see that technology is now taking a new dimension in potentially also maybe challenging the notion of authorship and where creative freedom really lies. So if we have this issue from the very moment of the creation gesture up to public intervention and how public funding functions, we'd really be keen to see how we can find strike the right balance between the two. How did you approach this in your analysis work?
Yeah, first it's important to say that I have a long tradition in public film funding. I founded Filminvest more than 30 years ago, and Filminvest is the major regional film fund in the Nordics, and also a fund that's always been very active when it comes to European corporations and European co-productions. We have 4 co-productions in Cannes competition section this year, for instance. So we have a heart in public film funding. And also that, I think, was the biggest driving force to make this study, because we felt, at least from a Nordic perspective, we felt worried about the future for selective public film funding. And I think selective public film funding is core if we want to keep cultural diversity and if we want to make sure that we make content with a strong reference and significance that links back to the different territories and the different countries, whatever, in Europe and elsewhere, of course. Because what happens when we have the, let's call it the global invasion or the invasion by the Americans, is of course that we stand a risk that a lot of the domestic content that is produced will be more generic than actually anything else, that it will sort of shape content in a very specific form. Because that's their logic. They use a lot of other arguments. We interviewed a lot of them because we interviewed 725 key persons in Europe's film and audiovisual life, and we have spoken with more than 4,500 persons in different workshops and seminars throughout this work. And we have also spoken with all streaming services of any importance in the European landscape, both in Europe and on the other side of the Atlantic Sea. And their core logic is, of course, that they are global. So they can speak about local flavors and the importance of the territories, but in the end of the day, content needs to work globally for them. And of course, there is a tricky thing for a lot of public funds, because there is not one single answer how public funds should deal with these new players moving into the market. And I also think that is a very important task to discuss, because this goes a little bit beyond. And that's the evolvement of something that we call the gray zone, and a lot of other people call the gray zone as well, where you can see traditional public funding means working together with a global streamer, often in a license deal. That means that the rights are kept by the production companies, but still you have a powerful partner in the structure. And what does that mean, and who holds power? And this is probably more acute when we talk about drama series, when we talk about the traditional feature films, cinema films, but still very important. And you can see now even big, strong film institutes, national film institutes in Europe, like the Danes, for instance, talking very fondly about the gray zone, because it gives 2 things. It gives funding of the specific project in a much faster way than if you use the very fragmentized and very slow model that European traditional financing offers. And 2, you can secure your exploitation in your territory. You can have cinema openings, you can have transaction VOD window, you might even have a free TV window, and you will have the content globally spread. But what happens if a lot of the content that we produce in Europe not only a lot of talents and whatever being very attractive to make things for global streamers, but also a lot of the content is made in the gray zone. What does that mean? Probably pluses, economically speaking, and other type of pluses, but what does it mean when it comes to in the end of the day, how much then of the diversity of the expressions and the soul in European cinema, how much of that will be left? And I think all these questions are quite crucial to discuss for public funders, because I think in a lot of countries and in a lot of regions, you need to start again to argue for the purpose of public film funding. Because a lot of the old type of purposes that exists, particularly in many small countries in Europe, where language was a core. But if suddenly some other players are financing a lot of content in your own language, what is then public film funding about? And what should it secure? And I think I agree with all of you in this panel about the most important thing is actually to secure artistic and creative freedom. And by that also securing the diversity in a very diverse Europe.
Well, I think the time has come to be a little less polite. So it's interesting what you're saying, Thomas, because I think maybe this influence of global streaming investment in smaller production countries is definitely not the same in the north of Europe and in other parts of Europe. I think there is maybe also an understanding from the western parts of Europe that this pressure that we have to deal with that impacts creation and all does in a particular production setup. But what happens in terms of public intervention in countries where maybe the appetite for these streaming platforms is less important? How do we, because this is not even a discussion, right? The concept that artistic freedom should underpin public intervention is not really challenged. It's actually maybe not as true in practice as it was in the past, because the commercial concerns are now very present, and our industry is an industry. It has an employment weight nationally that cannot be denied, and maybe sometimes against the industrial structure of your sector in a country and artistic freedom, choices are made that are not necessarily beneficial to artistic freedom. What can we imagine in terms of practice and focuses that would still motivate public intervention in a way that truly supports artistic freedom? Is there something to look into in terms of relationship to the audience, for example? Because that is something that is that has been mentioned by some of our filmmakers in the past in discussions, that when you are in a context where you create for streaming platforms, you have no visibility on what the audience does with what you've created, and there is a distance that's created. How can public intervention start to bridge that gap, for example, of the relationship with the audience? Is that something that you feel that there is a bit of a disconnection with your audience at some point, with the online distribution and the fact that maybe other distribution modes are shrinking under the pressure of the market? Yeah,
you just raised a whole range of questions, so I don't know which one to answer. Pick
yours.
I pick my. Well, the big question is really what is happening in countries with their own language, a small country with a small audience. It's very different. Maybe I'm not the one who has to answer that question, because I'm coming from Germany. There is Austria, there is Switzerland with a German-speaking part, and so on. And so it's rather big already, the audience. And maybe filmmakers from a country like that should answer that question. I think they are here, maybe even represented. But I would love to answer to Ms. 𝗬𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗃. And because I think we all have been very fond of the idea, we are fond of the idea, the fact that the idea of European co-production has been established like it is established right now. We have the platforms, we meet each other, the producers, the filmmakers, the financiers, the broadcasters. Everybody has the option now And we loved that, but we're living in a new world right now, I think, because what we have are competitors that work differently. What we have to do as filmmakers who pretty much depend on public funding, public television, are financing our films with, let's say, 15 different financiers. In the editing room, there are 3 broadcasters sitting and telling us what their audience would need, and we have to find compromises all the time. So this is a way of how do you say, creating obstacles for creative freedom, as you say. That is that is a totally new problem. And the idea of co-production, as good as it is in a political sense, as bad is it in a filmmaking sense. What we read right now is, I think, to rethink the idea of funding. The ideal thing would be, for instance, and that's what we are discussing right now in Germany, is what we would need is a federal fund, a regional fund, and a broadcaster, and that should it be. But now we are running for 15 others, and that take a lot of time. 2 years of financing for a documentary film with an issue that is burning is not good for creativity. And I would say that's a new horizon that needs us to rethink the idea of how public funding should support this creative freedom.
No, thank you for that. I chime in when I hear the gray zone. There's been a lot of discussion, basically about how do we fight what you call the gray zone, where everything becomes generic and more alike, because financing dictates what's being made in a sense that it's quickly financed. So my open question would be, if we look at the future of Europe and filmmaking in Europe, do we see a future where we build a wall around the gray zone and we work on the outside? Do we have any possibility to keep what's so precious about European cinema, instead of letting the industry become, overpower us in this gray zone? Is that, could you?
Well, I certainly haven't got the answer, but I'd just like to raise 2 points, I think, in relation to that. I certainly think that the way I personally, and I think also the members of representatives sitting on the board of management of Eurimages would like to see, would be that in the future there are valid choices, both for filmmakers and for producers, that there be options in terms of how you structure, and that they correspond to the vision of the creator. The creator may have a vision that they see as being to be viewed as a collective experience in a dark room. And that should be possible to make that work, and it should be possible to say things in that work that may not be to the taste of everyone, but that is the right of the creator to be able to express that. And in that context, I think that funds like Eurimages will always have their place, because we are very firmly a cultural fund. We help to make projects where liberty of expression is total, within the confinements that are provided for by the European Convention on Human Rights in relation to liberty of expression. But this is an absolutely indispensable thing. But we'd also like to see strong and sustainable production companies who have a choice. Sometimes they will use the model of a one-stop shop, and they can make a work they believe that, notably in the drama series area, that can be financed quickly and rapidly and reach audiences, though we may not know exactly which audiences they have reached because of problems of transparency. And on the other hand, they can also at other moments make urgent stories that they feel need to be shared and that the creator wishes to share within that privileged space, which is the cinema. So I think there needs to be choices, and I think that's where we need to, as public policy makers, certainly at a pan-European level, we need to move towards that possibility to provide choices.
maybe I think you need to have like a global approach as well, because what we're not talking about right now is the fear of a lot of creators and filmmakers and part of the industry watching the numbers of people going to the movies. This is what's on everybody's mind at the moment, and I think we should not, for the moment, worry too much. In France, we reached 220 million tickets box office 2 years ago, to 2019. But remember that 20 years ago, we were down at 120. Things change. And this is the role of, you're talking about public funding. I think it's the role of public bodies and public organizations. It's not just funding the production. You are here to set up a whole range of regulations to make the industry possible. But like at CNC at the moment, one of our priorities is also the writing process. We are creating a lot of programs to make French writers work more with European writers, Israeli writers, North American writers, to be more international in what they are proposing in terms of IP. I think the control of IP as well is going to be very important in the upcoming days. Like, it's how do you make sure that you as filmmakers, as writers, as authors, you keep the control of the IP. And I think the platforms should be seen as a new ally. I mean, it's like you cannot just build a wall. I mean, they are here, people watch it. So you just have to make sure that they are integrated. The same way in Europe, paid TV were integrated and are financing the creation. So I think it's not just about public funding, it's really about public policies as a global thing. Like, how do you bring school children to the movies? How do you show European content and European works in foreign markets? It's also like a wide range of policies that you have to put in place, from the writing process, the film schools, towards exploitation and international promotion of content.
But that requires a fairly strong political will to set into place a system that covers both legislation that protects different parts of the value chain, public intervention through funding, but also through other means. And I wonder if we sense such a high political will and an importance of that intervention across Europe at the moment.
We have different approaches. I think France has a strong political will in that area, in the cultural field in general. I mean, the Scandinavian countries sometimes have a different approach in terms of how the public intervention should work. Look at the 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝗻. I mean, we managed to all agree on the quotas on European works in terms of their exposition on the platform. The obligation of investment, which is for me the most important part, is just a possibility that is given to a member state. So in France, we reached 20%. In Italy, we are doing between 12 and 17%. In the rest of Europe, you are under 5%. And in very important countries like Germany, it doesn't exist at the moment. It's an ongoing discussion. So, I mean, we have different approaches, and we are within the EU 27. And I think you always need to find compromises on everything. But I think the political will in Europe, at least, generally speaking, is here.
Do you have a follow-up, Martin, on that? No. No, for what I find interesting is that in the end, sometimes when we talk about these issues, we are brought very quickly into general principles that we easily agree on and fairly tricky ways to implement that in real life. And I am wondering how, if we could build a sort of a general objective, a vision that would articulate the different levels of public intervention across Europe according to specific, besides the principle, specific action points that maybe today are not explored so much. We've talked with a few of our members about how development was approached by the different levels of public funding. In that particular instance. I mean, development is a fairly delicate moment for filmmakers, and that's also an important part of the creative space and artistic freedom you have to develop these new ideas. And yet the flexibility around these is not necessarily there. Is that something that we could explore to be a little bit more consistent in that part of the value chain, to build things in a it's an impossible ask, is it?
Yeah, I think one of the things...
Let's see if I can say something.
Oh, please, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think something that is quite crucial to say, we interviewed people across entire Europe. So it's 725 persons across Europe, and we have had a communication with a lot of people. And it's absolutely true that we have different type of thinking and traditions in different parts of Europe. And I think regulation is one of the issues, because in some parts of Europe, there is a lot of regulations, and in other parts of Europe, there's very little regulation when it comes to art and culture. But then something very important in this study we made, and also in all, more or less in all type of, I was in Italy and had a panel debate with a lot of producers from Austria, Switzerland, and from Italy. And something that occurs all the time is substantially more funding for fewer projects. And not only when it comes to production, also when it comes to development. So much more generous development support needs to be there if we also want to safeguard the importance of selective film funding in the future. And I totally agree with my French friend about the importance of a holistic approach on film politics. And of course, we could have made a study about holistic approaches, but then it would not have been so easy to make. So we choose to make a study about something that we believe is very crucial to safeguard, because it's not only about film funding, it's particularly about selective film funding. And it's not only an issue that we can discuss in Northern, Western, and Southern Europe, because we have parts of Europe where it's much more attractive and much more important to speak about different type of tax incentive, production rebates, and other type of solutions. And that in our own opinion, but also I think in a lot of respondents' opinion, of course, that takes away, that moves film politics into something that is not so much culture policy, that is much more economical policy, because that's the objectives that often are linked to automatic financing system. And then we are back again, because then we are talking about big parts of Europe. Then we are back again to the crucial aspect that is really about artistic and creative freedom and control, that is about the diversity in European cinema, and to safeguard that we will have that in the future.
And safeguarding cinema also means to preserve a window of exposure for films there. And I've heard recently that from our Italian colleagues that the Italian government was looking into building legislation to preserve a certain window of exploitation. And France has meanwhile evolved on its approach to the window system. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approach these changes?
Yeah, we actually finalized the agreement on January 24th, which is the day before our conference hosted at CNC about the French presidency. So we were quite happy because we really wanted the new window releasing to be done before the presidency's conference. It's linked to the AVMS directive. And so in the new chronology has been reduced from 44 months to 36 months in total. And we have still at heart the preservation of the theaters. So you have a first window for theatrical release of 3 to 4 months. 3 months, it's an exemption if the movie didn't make at least 100,000 tickets at the box office. So it's just allowing you then to move to physical DVD releases and 𝗕𝗲𝗿. And then for the streaming platforms, they are able to stream the films at 15 months for Netflix, because Netflix signed an agreement with all producers and authors and filmmakers in France, and other platforms it's at 17 months. So some people still think, like Pascal Regard, the head of SACD in France, that it's still too old school and that we should have done more changes. But we strongly believe it's a very coherent and balanced way of integrating the different moments of the life of a film and an audiovisual work in its releasing period. And this is not set in stone for the next 15 years. This chronology can be reviewed every year. I mean, and I think it's something very important. I mean, CNC was created in 1946 after the war to find a way to foster French production at a time where all the movies were coming from the US and people were just watching American films. Believe me, since 1946, our rules and regulations and funding have been changing a lot. And including during the COVID years, we had at least half a dozen of exceptional board meetings to adjust our schemes and adjust our regulations for the sector. So nothing is set in stone besides freedom of besides the freedom of creativity, and this is set in stone.
No, I believe the problem in Europe is that Europe is being built on economy. My generation, when that adventure started, were hoping to have a Europe doing artistically, for arts, for education, for culture, let's say, generally, education, social problems, and then economy, and then all the rest. But it started for economy. And then inside of that big thing, they say, okay, let's save a little bit the cinema, Eurimages, very little, just to help, not shut their mouths. And then let's help this and this about culture, about education. Let's do Erasmus, and they will shut their mouth. Instead, the Europe should be completely different, in my feeling. It is not. I hope it will change. For years, it was economy and economy and economy. And we can see the results today. And concerning the arts, and particularly the cinema, because talking about cinema, you have the platforms. The platforms is in a major danger. Of course, it's a cultural and social, I would say, and historical reality. We cannot say, let's forget them. No, they're here. But if Europe gets together, all the countries, they can control them. For the moment, they control us. That's the problem, too, for Europe. So, and once more, let's hope they will change. But it doesn't go very fast, you know. So we talk about Europe, Europe, Europe. Yes, we feel Europeans, we like Europe, and we need Europe. But Europe has to be what should be, and it is not.
How do you go about changing Europe?
Yeah, maybe as a final question to wrap this up, if you David, if you look at the future of European cinema, does it look bright to you? Do you see a future where European cinema is still going strong as we have been looking back on our heritage? Will that continue, or will we all be lost in the gray zone? What do you think?
Well, my task is to say yes, it will be beautiful, for sure. And there is a lot to reach. Let's reach for the horizons. I think we have to be optimistic about this, just because we need it. We need the film as a culture in Europe. And you are totally right. We have to focus more on that side of the idea. We're stuck in the economic idea of filmmaking. We are competing with economically much stronger competitors like the streamers right now. And we have to find new ways to deal with that. But I think there is a big demand in film, probably more than ever. Maybe the theater is not the place anymore. maybe cinema is more just a set of the idea of quality, of culture, and not really a location. We have to deal with that either. But I think that the horizon is great because the society needs films, needs stories, needs the speciality that only film delivers to immerse in other worlds. So that's what we need. We can't live without it. So I think the future is bright.
I think we have to be a little bit more conscious about what's going on. We're living in a deep revolution, cultural revolution, and revolution about concerning image, how we make all the spectacles in television and in cinema, of course, and how we receive them. From one side, the making, and the other side, the showing. And really a deep revolution, and nobody knows exactly where we're going. Big companies getting, you spoke about Netflix, there are others, there will be more than that. Their project, it's not cultural, it's not social, it's economical. They like to make money. That's the problem. So if Europe, I repeat it, don't get together to control that in a different direction, they will take over everything. That's essentially the problem today. So, because today we can make movies easily with Netflix. Say they come, what you want, but tomorrow they go and control the scripts. They start doing it a little bit. And to show the movie, you show it everywhere. So there is no response, there is back money coming back. And the awful thing is to watch our movies, we're making the movies, in your telephone. It's a barbarism. Because you spend so much money, so talent, have so much talents working on it to make good movies. This is the other problem. So how we cannot control all this, of course. It's the freedom, but there is the making of the movies which is important. Not to make everything, not to make the same movie again and again. The movie who makes money, because this is the danger. Because in Europe, let's say openly, we speak only economy, we speak on money. I spoke about Erasmus, for example. It's extraordinary Erasmus. But so how many young people go through Erasmus and met other European people, other European young people that they make together? We should have Erasmus about the agriculture, the bread making. That we absolutely have to meet Europeans. I mean, probably it's an exaggeration, but the Europe must be for everybody and larger. But we have also inside Europe countries who change completely the democracy, and we accept them. They do. This is also the other problem with Europe. So let's say, probably with Putin, a lot of things will change. Because for the first time, Europe gets together, for the first time. But now, not only for war, it's got better to get together for all the rest of it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think on these words, we know that we have a long road to walk to make sure that all these values continue to really embody all the work that the European Union and then the member states and then our members can do together in the future and allow for a significant, path outside of the gray zone to remain a real truth. That's my takeaway from this, and it's our course of action and direction of travel, I reckon. So with this, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today in person and online. Thank you to our audience, and we'll...
Thank you. Thank you for listening to us.